MS Now's Kevin Fry is reporting from Capitol Hill. Also with us, MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard, Associated Press national politics reporter Meg Kinnard, who has spent years covering South Carolina. And here in studio with me, MS Now co-host of The Weekend, Jonathan Capehart. Meg, any reason to believe Governor McMaster wouldn't pick Graham's sister? What do we know about her?
What we know about her is that she has long been part of Lindsey Graham's, obviously his personal life, but also his political life. Darlene has been there at his side at many campaign events. We all know Lindsey Graham never married, and so his sister Darlene has really been a companion in a lot of ways as he's been out campaigning. And we do have every reason to believe that what the president posted on Truth Social is likely what we'll see happening here in terms of that caretaker appointment, somebody to serve out the remaining about 6 months of Lindsey Graham's term. But let's not forget about that special election that will be happening later this summer to determine that Republican primary winner going forth into that November general election.
And we'll talk about that seat in a minute. But Vaughn, we heard the president seize on Graham's death to say the late senator really wanted to get his election overhaul bill passed. If McMaster does what Trump wants, puts Darlene in the spot, puts Graham's sister in the spot, does he think that puts him closer to getting the SAVE Act passed?
I mean, the difficult part is that he was the head of the Budget Committee, and that it's not going to be a reality now that he is gone. And so, I mean, John Thune, Republican senators, Tom Tillis have suggested time and again that there is very little chance that the Save America Act would be able to make its way through the Senate. There was a suggestion by President Trump when he was on Fox this morning that Senator Graham was going to figure out a way to get it passed through reconciliation process, which most believe that there would be zero chance that it would ultimately make its way through. But yet what you heard frustration was from the president was the fact that he felt like at least somebody who is willing to speak the words and to make the fight on Capitol Hill is gone. And yes, he has, if his sister does in fact fill that seat, he has somebody of the same family in that position, but it still doesn't change the numbers. It's still a Republican filling a Republican seat, and he doesn't have enough Republicans to get the Save America Act through in the current way of the congressional makeup.
I want you all to take a listen to what Democratic Senator Cory Booker told MS Now about his concern with the race to replace Graham.
I know that Lindsey Graham, despite my disappointments with him and his complicity towards the president, I know he was often the guy trying to stop the president from his worst inclinations. So I hope this president doesn't now try to exploit his death in pursuit of his own personal political aims.
It would seem that ship has already sailed.
Oh, it sailed the moment President Trump went on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker. Look, the president has never been shy about using any kind of crisis, any kind of anything to advance his own agenda. We were all at the White House Correspondents' Dinner when the shooting broke out. And what was the immediate response? It was, this is why we need the ballroom. And that was the explanation that came from the president. It came from the attorney general. It came from all sorts of other people. So I was the least surprised that the president used the death of his good friend, Senator Graham, to push for the Save America Act. You know, Vaughn is absolutely right. The numbers do not change for the president in terms of getting that act passed. And some sources have told me that one of the things they might try to do is to try to get the Save America Act through reconciliation by putting some budgetary things in there so that it can pass, they hope, muster with the Senate parliamentarian. But it's highly unlikely. And also, the president wants the filibuster also removed as a way of greasing the skids for the Save America.
That is a non-starter.
Thune has said is a non-starter. But to Senator Booker's point, and this is what I'm going to be watching for. If Senator Booker is right that Senator Graham was the one behind the scenes pushing back against the president's major terrible instincts, without Lindsey Graham there, who's now going to be that person? And will the president feel unleashed to put even more pressure on Senator Thune, which puts more pressure on Senator Thune to protect the prerogatives of the Senate?
And can anyone ever truly be effective in that role? Maybe we referenced that Godfather post from outgoing Congresswoman Nancy Mace of just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. That was just too much for her colleague, Republican Mike Lawler, who posted, literally no one is pulling you back in. This post is grotesque, taking glee over the potential of becoming a senator because of a vacancy created by the sudden death of your colleague is vile, completely unfit to serve. Mace was just rejected by South Carolina Republicans. She finished 5th in the primary for governor. Why would this be different? What's even her internal logic?
It's hard to know. I think there have been a lot of people since the end of that gubernatorial primary who have been wondering what's next for Nancy Mace. She says she's not returning to the House. Clearly, she lost the governor's race. So there were a couple of news cycles there right after the June 9th primary of what's next up for her. And so there's always curiosity. Clearly, Nancy Mace gets headlines. There's always a lot of interest in what she's up to. And so this may be an opportunity to just try to capitalize on that to get some attention. But it wouldn't be beyond the pale to me if she were interested in what comes after the appointment we talked about, which is going to be that primary. There will be a lot of candidates. Clearly, there will be some that might make a better fit than others. There's been talk about maybe not appointing someone from the U.S. House so as not to diminish Republican margins in that chamber as it sits right now. But I think in this point, this is maybe a trial balloon of sorts to kind of see what the reaction was. But you read it out from Congressman Lawler right there.
Kevin, I imagine the last thing Republicans want in the House is someone pulled from their ranks to fill this vacancy, given how thin their majority is. Talk to me about the cross-chamber strategizing that is or is not happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's razor thin in the House of Representatives, and we have seen that play out in the fact that House Republican leadership has sent lawmakers home repeatedly in recent weeks and months because they have not been able to overcome a simple majority required to pass the rule to unlock basic procedures on the House so they can actually vote on policy beyond just kind of the simple things that they can do with a simple suspension vote where they don't actually need to pass the rule. So that's already been chaotic as is. So then the idea of ripping someone out and putting them over in the Senate is really not going to pass muster. You've already seen Congressman Joe Wilson, for example, who has been floated as someone who maybe would want to take this position. He came out with a not so cryptic message yesterday saying, essentially, I've spoken to the president. I understand. I can't leave the House right now because we need to maintain the majority as it stands. So you see some of the names that are in the mix there on the screen. I would keep an eye on those House lawmakers, perhaps for the full 6-year term. For example, Wilson, who's been in Congress for about 2 decades serving in the House. His message was vague enough that he kept the door open to the possibility of trying to replace Graham in a full 6-year term. Mace, you were already touching on the fact that she ran for governor, did not even get to the runoff phase there. There's also a handful of other lawmakers to keep an eye on. Ralph Norman, another one who's been in Congress for about a decade. He is eyeing potentially jumping into this race. We could get news on that front as early as tomorrow, according to our team. So obviously, the dynamics of the House margins playing into at least the consideration in the short term for this stopgap, fill in the blank, until we get to the full term for full race later this year.